When an officer receives an unexpected call from a 3-year-old, he thought it to be a prank, but knowing never to underestimate any emergency calls, he rushes and what he finds at the scene churns his stomach. Could it just be a child playing or something more horrific? Let's listen. Also, let us know where you're listening from. The rain hammered against the windshield of Officer Daniel Dan Hayes' patrol car, blurring the already fading light of the late October afternoon in Maplewood. A small town where everyone knew each other, Maplewood was usually serene, but tonight, the relentless downpour added an edge of tension to the air. Dan, a veteran of the Maplewood Police Department with 20 years under his belt, was exhausted. His bones ached from the damp cold that seeped into his uniform despite the heater blasting in the car. He was looking forward to the end of his shift, a hot meal and the comfortable silence of his modest home. But just as he was about to relax, his radio crackled to life. Possible domestic disturbance at 123 Elm Avenue. Caller is a 3-year-old male. Dan frowned. A 3-year-old making a call? It had to be a mistake. A child playing with the phone or a prank? Yet, something in the dispatcher's voice, a mix of disbelief and concern, made his instincts kick in. He couldn't dismiss it. Over his 2 decades on the force, Dan had learned never to underestimate the seriousness of any call, especially when a child was involved. He flipped on his siren, the wail cutting through the rhythmic drumming of the rain. Elm Avenue was a quiet residential area lined with neat single-family homes. As he pulled up to number 123, a small white bungalow with a neglected flower bed and a rusty swing set in the backyard came into view. An overturned tricycle lay on the walkway, and Dan felt a pang of apprehension as he stepped out of his car, the cold rain instantly plastering his uniform to his skin. Dan approached the front door cautiously, his hand hovering over his holster. He could hear muffled sounds from inside, a whimper, a soft sob, and a rhythmic thump that sent a shiver down his spine. He knocked firmly, his voice projecting authority and reassurance. "Police, open up!" Silence answered him for a moment, then a small, hesitant voice whispered, barely audible over the rain. "Who is it?" Dan knelt, bringing himself closer to the level of the doorknob. "It's Officer Dan from the police. Can you open the door for me?" The lock clicked, and the door creaked open a few inches. Wide, tear-filled blue eyes peeked out. A little boy, no older than 3, with tousled blonde hair plastered to his forehead, and a face streaked with dirt and tears stood clutching a worn teddy bear. "Are you hurt?" Dan asked gently, his voice softening. The boy shook his head, his lower lip trembling. "No, but Grandpa fell down and he won't wake up." Dan felt a surge of adrenaline. This was no prank. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, immediately scanning the living room. An elderly man lay sprawled on the floor, unmoving. The air was thick with the smell of damp wool and something else, a faintly metallic scent that made Dan's stomach churn. He rushed to the man's side, his trained eyes assessing the situation. Mr. Robert Miller, thin and pale, was unconscious. His breathing was shallow and labored. A pool of blood was slowly spreading beneath his head, staining the worn carpet a dark crimson. Dan's pulse quickened. He checked for a pulse, weak and thready. He grabbed his radio and barked into it. "Officer needs assistance at 123 Elm Avenue. Possible unconscious male, head injury. Requesting immediate medical backup." The little boy, still clutching his teddy bear, watched Dan with wide, frightened eyes. "Is Grandpa going to be okay?" he whispered, his voice barely a thread. Dan forced a reassuring smile, though his gut clenched with worry. "We're going to take good care of him," he said, trying to project calm despite the urgency of the situation. As paramedics rushed in, their movements swift and practiced, Dan gently ushered the boy away from the commotion, leading him to a worn sofa in the corner of the room. He noticed a landline phone on a nearby table, the receiver dangling off the hook. "Did you call?" Dan asked the boy. The boy nodded. "Mommy taught me how," he said with a flicker of pride, momentarily eclipsing the fear in his eyes. "If something bad happened, I should call and tell them our address and my name." Dan was astounded. This little boy, barely old enough to tie his shoelaces, had the presence of mind to call for help in such a frightening situation. He had potentially saved his grandfather's life. Dan knelt down in front of the boy, meeting his gaze. "You did a very brave thing, son. You did a great job." The boy sniffled and wiped his nose with the sleeve of his pajamas, leaving a smear of dirt. "I just wanted to help Grandpa," he whispered, his voice thick with tears. Dan felt a swell of admiration and protectiveness. "You're a hero, Liam," he said softly. After ensuring that Mr. Miller was being attended to by the paramedics, Dan sat down beside Liam. He learned that Liam lived with his grandfather while his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Michael Miller, were away on an extended business trip overseas. Mr. Miller had a history of heart problems and had recently been experiencing dizziness and weakness. It seemed he had fainted and hit his head on the coffee table. As Dan spoke with Mr. Miller later at the hospital, the elderly man was awake, though groggy and confused. "Liam saved your life," Dan told him. "He was very brave." Mr. Miller's voice was weak but filled with gratitude. "He's a good boy, smart too, takes after his mother." Dan listened attentively as Mr. Miller shared more about their situation. The Millers had always been successful entrepreneurs, their work demanding constant attention and frequent travel. They had felt guilty about leaving Liam with his grandfather, but believed it was the best option for him. However, Mr. Miller admitted that it was getting increasingly difficult to keep up with the energetic toddler and his own failing health. Dan couldn't shake the feeling that this call was more than just another case. Liam's bravery, his love for his grandfather, and the vulnerability in his eyes had touched him deeply. He felt a sense of responsibility towards the boy, a need to ensure his well-being that went beyond his duty as a police officer. Driving back to the station, Dan wrestled with his conscience. His duty was to uphold the law and protect citizens, but was he overstepping his boundaries by interfering in Liam's family life? Was he justified in reporting them to Child Protective Services CPS? It was a gray area, one that made him deeply uncomfortable. Reporting could have serious repercussions for Liam's parents, potentially even leading to him being removed from their care. He decided to seek counsel from his captain, a woman he respected for her wisdom and compassion, Captain Laura Bennett. Dan explained the situation, his voice thick with concern. "It's a tough one, Dan," Captain Bennett said, leaning back in her chair, her brow furrowed. "You're right. It's a gray area, but you've got a good heart and you're a damn good judge of character. If you believe this child is at risk, you have an obligation to act. The system isn't perfect, but sometimes it's the only way to ensure a child's safety." With his captain's support, Dan contacted CPS. He detailed his observations, emphasizing Liam's vulnerability and the potential dangers of his situation. He stressed Mr. Miller's declining health and his inability to provide adequate supervision for an energetic 3-year-old. He also mentioned the incident with the kitchen. Liam's eagerness to help had almost set the kitchen on fire. The next day, a social worker named Emily Carter visited Mr. Miller and Liam at the hospital. Dan waited anxiously for an update, his mind filled with conflicting emotions. He knew he had done the right thing, yet he couldn't shake off the feeling of guilt, the fear that he might have disrupted this family's life irrevocably. Later that afternoon, Dan received a call from Emily. "Officer Hayes, thank you for bringing this to our attention. We've assessed the situation and will be providing support services to the family. We'll also be working with Mr. and Mrs. Miller to ensure Liam's needs are met. We're providing Mr. Miller with home healthcare assistance to help manage his health and provide adequate supervision for Liam. We'll also be contacting the Millers to discuss childcare options while they're away." Dan breathed a sigh of relief. He had potentially prevented a tragedy and helped ensure that Liam would receive the care and attention he needed. He had gone beyond the call of duty and made a difference in a child's life. While Mr. Miller recovered in the hospital, Dan found himself drawn back to Elm Avenue. He would stop by after his shift, sometimes with a bag of groceries, sometimes with a small toy for Liam. He learned that Liam loved dinosaurs and superheroes and that he missed his parents dearly. He discovered that Liam was a bright and inquisitive child, full of energy and curiosity, but also deeply sensitive and in need of affection. Dan, who had never been a father himself, found surprising joy in spending time with Liam. He taught him how to throw a baseball in the small backyard, helped him build a magnificent fort out of blankets and chairs in the living room, and read him bedtime stories with dramatic flair. He even took him to the police station, letting him sit in his patrol car, try on his hat, and meet his fellow officers, who were charmed by the little boy's enthusiasm. In turn, Liam seemed to adore Dan. He would run to greet him at the door, his face lighting up with a smile that could melt the hardest heart. He would chatter endlessly about his day, his toys, and his dreams of becoming a firefighter who rescued kittens from trees. He would even ask Dan about his job, his eyes wide with fascination as Dan recounted sanitized stories from his days on patrol. Dan found himself looking forward to these visits. Liam's innocence and enthusiasm were a breath of fresh air, a welcome contrast to the harsh realities of his job. He realized that he was forming a bond with this little boy, a bond that went beyond his duty as a police officer. One afternoon while visiting Liam, Dan noticed a framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It showed a younger Mr. Miller, beaming with pride, holding a newborn baby wrapped in a blue blanket. "Is that you, Liam?" Dan asked, pointing to the photo. Liam nodded. "Grandpa said I was a very tiny baby and that I cried a lot." Dan studied the photo. He saw the love in Mr. Miller's eyes, the same love he now saw in Liam's eyes when he looked at his grandfather. Despite the challenges, this was a family bound by deep affection, a love that transcended distance and circumstance. As Mr. Miller's health improved and he was able to return home, his spirits lifted by the prospect of being back in his familiar surroundings and the constant presence of his beloved grandson, Dan continued to visit. He found himself drawn into their small, loving world, helping Mr. Miller with chores around the house, fixing a leaky faucet, mowing the overgrown lawn, and putting up new curtains. He played games with Liam, building elaborate Lego castles, drawing fantastical creatures, and engaging in epic battles with toy dinosaurs. He shared meals with them, enjoying Mrs. Miller's delicious casseroles and Mr. Miller's stories of his younger days. Dan became a fixture in their lives, a source of support and stability, a constant presence in a world that often felt unpredictable and uncertain. He was the one who took Liam to the park on sunny afternoons, pushing him on the swings until he shrieked with laughter. He was the one who bandaged Liam's scraped knees and soothed his nightmares. He was the one who listened patiently to Mr. Miller's worries about his health and his hopes for Liam's future. One evening, while having dinner with Liam and Mr. Miller, Dan received a call from Captain Bennett. "There's been a break-in at a local jewelry store in Riverton. We need all hands on deck. Can you handle it?" Dan apologized for having to leave abruptly, promising Liam he would be back soon with a detailed account of the daring capture of the jewel thieves. As he drove towards the crime scene, the flashing lights of his patrol car reflecting off the wet asphalt, Dan felt a pang of guilt. He had grown accustomed to the quiet evenings with Liam and Mr. Miller, the simple pleasures of their company, the feeling of being needed and appreciated. He had become attached to them and knew they had become attached to him. The case at the jewelry store turned out to be more complicated than initially thought. It involved a string of robberies across the county, and Dan found himself working long hours chasing leads, interviewing suspects, and analyzing evidence. Days turned into weeks, and he had little time to visit Liam and Mr. Miller. He called them regularly, checking in and making excuses for his absence, his voice filled with regret. Finally, after weeks of intense investigation, the case was cracked. The culprits were apprehended, and the stolen jewelry was recovered. Exhausted but relieved, Dan drove straight to Elm Avenue, eager to see Liam and Mr. Miller, to share the news of his triumph, and to reassure them that he was back. He found them in the living room, playing checkers on a small table by the window. Liam, upon seeing Dan, jumped up and ran towards him, his arms outstretched, his face beaming with joy. "Dan!" he shouted, hugging him tightly. "You came back!" Dan hugged him back, feeling a warmth spread through him, chasing away the weariness and the lingering tension of the case. He had missed this, missed the feeling of being needed, of being part of something meaningful, of belonging. A few weeks later, Liam's parents returned from their extended business trip. Dan, unsure of how they would react to his involvement in their lives, decided to give them some space. He stayed away from Elm Avenue, focusing on his work and trying to push aside the nagging feeling of emptiness that had settled in his heart. He told himself that he had done his duty, that Liam was safe and well cared for, and that it was time for him to step back. But the thought of Liam, his bright smile, his infectious laughter, and the way he would run to hug him, filled him with a longing that was hard to ignore. One afternoon while on patrol, Dan received a call from the dispatcher. "Officer Hayes, there's a Mr. and Mrs. Miller at the station. They're asking to see you." Dan's heart skipped a beat. He knew who they were. He drove to the station, a mix of apprehension and anticipation churning in his stomach. He wondered what they wanted, if they were upset about his involvement, if they would accuse him of overstepping his boundaries. In the reception area, he found Liam's parents waiting for him. They were a well-dressed couple, their faces etched with a mixture of gratitude and guilt. Mrs. Miller, her eyes red-rimmed, was holding a bouquet of flowers. Mr. Miller began extending his hand. "We wanted to thank you for everything you've done for our son and my father," Mr. Miller said. Mrs. Miller, her voice trembling with emotion, added, "We were so relieved to know that Liam had someone like you to look after him while we were away. We were so worried about him, about my father. We can't thank you enough." Dan was taken aback. He had expected resentment, perhaps even anger, but instead, he was met with gratitude and appreciation. "It was my pleasure," he mumbled, feeling a blush creep up his cheeks. He wasn't used to being thanked for doing his job, let alone for something that felt so personal, so close to his heart. "Liam talks about you all the time, Mrs. Miller continued, a smile breaking through her tears. "He calls you his hero. He says you're the bravest, strongest, and kindest man he knows." Dan's heart swelled with emotion. He had never considered himself a hero, but hearing those words from Liam's mother filled him with a sense of pride and purpose. He had made a difference in this child's life, and that realization was more rewarding than any medal or commendation. Ethan's parents explained that their frequent business trips were a necessity, a sacrifice they made to provide a better life for their son. They were both successful entrepreneurs, their work demanding constant attention and frequent travel. They had always felt guilty about leaving Liam with his grandfather, but had believed it was the best option for him. However, they acknowledged that they had been neglecting Liam's emotional needs. Blinded by their ambition and desire to provide material comfort, they realized with a pang of guilt that they had missed out on precious moments of their son's childhood, moments that could never be recovered. "We were so focused on building a future for Liam," Mr. Miller confessed, his voice filled with regret, "that we forgot to be present in his present." Mrs. Miller nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "We saw the reports from the social worker, and we had a long, hard look at ourselves. We realized that we were failing our son. We were so caught up in our own world that we didn't see how lonely he was, how much he needed us." They had decided to make some changes in their lives, prioritizing their family over their careers. They committed to being more present in Liam's life, reducing travel, and improving their parenting. They were also considering enrolling him in a daycare program where he could interact with other children and receive the attention he needed. "We want to be the parents Liam deserves," Mrs. Miller said, her voice firm with determination. "We want to be there for him to share his joys and sorrows, to watch him grow and learn. We want to be a family." Dan listened attentively, impressed by their sincerity and willingness to change. He offered his support, assuring them that he would continue to be there for Liam and Mr. Miller, not as a police officer or a social worker, but as a friend. He left the station feeling a sense of closure. He had played a small part in helping this family find their way back to each other. He had potentially prevented a tragedy and helped ensure that Liam would receive the love and care he needed. He had gone beyond the call of duty and made a difference in a child's life. As Mr. Miller recovered at home, Dan found himself drawn back to Elm Avenue. He continued to visit, often bringing groceries or small gifts for Liam. He learned that Liam loved dinosaurs and superheroes, and that he missed his parents dearly. Dan discovered that Liam was a bright and inquisitive child, full of energy and curiosity, but also deeply sensitive and in need of affection. Through his relationship with Liam, Dan discovered a newfound sense of purpose and fulfillment. Inspired by his involvement with Liam and Mr. Miller, he began to engage in community volunteer work and mentoring at-risk youth. He found that he enjoyed working with young people, sharing his life experiences, offering guidance, and helping them navigate the challenges of adolescence. Dan also continued to visit Liam and his family, becoming a cherished friend and honorary uncle. He watched Liam grow, marveling at his curiosity, boundless energy, and developing personality. He shared in their joys and sorrows, celebrated birthdays, offered comfort during illnesses, and simply enjoyed being present in their lives. Dan's experience with Liam had transformed him. He was no longer just a police officer, he was a mentor, a friend, a father figure. He had learned the value of compassion, the importance of connection, and the power of love. He realized that true strength lay not just in physical prowess or authority, but in empathy, kindness, and the willingness to help others. One evening, while sitting on the porch with Mr. Miller watching Liam chase fireflies in the backyard, their laughter echoing through the twilight, Dan felt a sense of contentment wash over him. He had found a place, a purpose, a family. He looked at Mr. Miller, his face etched with age but his eyes sparkling with joy. "You know," Dan said softly, "I never thought I'd find a place like this, a family like this." Mr. Miller smiled, his gaze following Liam's playful movements. "Sometimes life surprises you. It brings you unexpected gifts, unexpected connections, unexpected love." Dan nodded, his heart filled with gratitude. He had received an unexpected gift, a gift that had changed his life in ways he could never have imagined. He had found a family, a home, a purpose. He had found a love that transcended blood ties, a love that had blossomed from a simple act of kindness, a love that had healed his heart and given him a new direction in life. Have you ever witnessed a small act of bravery that led to significant changes in someone's life? Let us know in the comments below.